Uh, Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the February 9th, 2021 meeting of the Milton Conservation Commission. As a matter of formality, we always introduce ourselves. My name is John Kiernan. Steve, you want to go?
Steve Ibis, Conservation Agent.
Jerry Burke.
Wendy?
Wendy Garpo.
Ingrid Beatty.
Hey, there you are.
Hey,
Hi,
good.
Ingrid. Hey, good for you. Arthur, did you go?
Arthur Doyle.
Marvin Gordon.
Hey, Marvin, good morning, good evening. Good evening. And who do we miss? Hans, did you
Hans.
introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, perfect, all right. Hey, there you are, Ingrid. All right, we're ready to go. And Todd, you did as well, correct?
Yeah, I'm here. Yes.
All right, great, thanks. So we've had an adjustment to the agenda. We've only got a short agenda tonight. The first one is Milton Academy. The second one is 485, 487 Blue Hill Parkway. There's a bit of a delay in the engineer for Milton Academy joining us, so they asked us to reverse the order. I did talk to Charlie Bosworth, and he's indicated that he's okay to go first. That's still true, Charlie?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And we do invite the public participation. We ask people to ask questions, to make suggestions, make comments. The only requirement that we have is that you introduce yourself so that the record is clear as to who's speaking. But with that, let's proceed to number 2 on the agenda. That's the notice of intent 485-487 Blue Hill Parkway. You're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Scott Golding from Drow and Tachua Morgan, representing the applicant. The subject property is 485 through 487 Blue Hills Parkway. The applicant is 485 through 487 BHP Trust LLC. I'll introduce the team and then give a brief overview of the project and then turn it over to the experts to run through the project. So first we have, excuse me.
Before you proceed, let me interrupt you quickly.
I'm sorry.
It didn't dawn on me that you're with Drone, Tachio, and Morgan. And I put this out there and asked people if they have concerns. My wife works at Drone, Tachio, and Morgan, Susan Kiernan, and has for 20 odd years. I don't know that she knows anything about, in fact, she's never said anything to me about it. But if that's a concern to anybody, I'd be willing to recuse myself from consideration of this project. I was not aware of the potential conflict. Scott, you can address that issue, or Charlie Bosworth, you can address it.
I mean, I on behalf of the applicant, I don't believe there would be any sort of conflict presented by, you're chairing on behalf of the commission. Charlie, I would defer to you, but I obviously, I've never spoken about this project with your wife, and I don't believe there's any sort of conflict presented.
No, we do not have any opposition to John staying on.
All right. Anybody else have any concerns? Yeah, please speak now, and I don't say forever hold your peace. You can bring it up at any time you want. I don't feel conflicted. I've never talked to Susan about this. I don't think she knows anything about it, to be honest with you. But hearing no objection, I will continue then. And my apologies for the interruption, Scott. You can go back and continue.
Oh, great, thank you. And I'll just introduce the project team. On the Zoom are Charlie Bosworth and Paul Driscoll, who are the managers of the applicant LLC. Also here is Michael Joyce from Joyce Consulting, who is a professional engineer, and John Zimmer from South River Environmental, who is a wetland scientist. The subject property is 2.03 acres. It has frontage along Blue Hills Parkway. The site surrounded, it actually directly abuts some conservation property. The subject site is previously improved with 3 existing buildings and pertinent improvements on the property. We are proposing, associated with this filing, it's a comprehensive permit condominium project known as the Ice House. We're proposing to construct a new approximately 20,000 square foot building with 52 units, and then other exterior fixtures, a mix of interior and exterior parking. Overall, the project is a buffer zone project. There are existing improvements in the buffer zone. We are proposing the similar improvements that are only within the buffer zone, only a de minimis increase in the impervious area within the buffer, and no work any closer to the resource areas. I'll start by handing it over to John Zimmer to describe the subject resource area, and then hand it off to Mike Joyce to review the existing and proposed conditions in more detail, and then we can go from there.
And John, which plan would you like to see?
Is it possible for me to share my screen? I'm sorry to interrupt. I just have a couple of figures that might be helpful.
I have them as well, Michael.
Well, actually, I prepared a couple additional
Oh, okay.
to make it a little bit clearer.
That's fine.
Okay, if not, that's fine as well.
Absolutely. Right ahead.
Oh, I can't screen share. So why don't you go ahead, Steve?
Okay, which would you like to see? Can you see them at the bottom? No, you can't see them at the bottom of the screen right now, can you? No. Which would you like to see? I've got a plan view, and I've got an aerial view. Then I've got the set of plans. I've got the FEMA format, which I'd like to talk about at some point.
Yeah, Steve, let's go with the aerial view, and then when
Aerial view.
Mike takes over, we can go to the plan view.
So,
Proposed development.
how's that right there? Can you see that?
We don't see anything. We don't see anything yet.
Oh, interesting.
And by the way, John Zimmer, it may be possible if our meeting host is still with us. Is Mike Lynch listening?
No, Shane, actually, Shane, are you still there?
Sometimes they can share the share screen, John. Right now, I think it's only available to Steve.
Actually, I don't think it is, because I'm trying to share the screen and you folks don't see it, do you?
No,
No,
no.
sir.
Okay. That's too bad.
Do you happen to have a number for Shane? Maybe we can get him back on and he can help us.
Shane, I do not.
I can try Michael Lynch.
Sure.
He's been very, very helpful in the past. And Steve, you may know this. I'm looking at the bottom. It says MATV stream. You know what that box is?
I do not.
Does anybody? I don't know if everybody sees what I'm looking at, but it says MATV stream. I didn't know if that was like a technical app or.
I think it's probably a community television stream.
Right.
That's why sometimes they listen and they can help us out. That's what I thought.
Would you like me to give Michael a call to see if he can call Shane?
Yes, that's what I'm doing now.
Oh, okay, fine. Okay.
One of us could send a chat to the MATV stream. If anybody's there, they may see it.
Go ahead, Wendy,
Okay,
please. Yep.
all right.
Hey, Mike Lynch, this is John Kiernan from the Conservation Commission in Milton. And we've got a conservation meeting going right now, and we're having trouble with our screen share. We're unable to do it. I think Shane is on duty tonight, but we don't know how to contact him. Well, Steve, both. If Steve could do it, it would be great. And then John Zimmer also would like to share. He's a wetland scientist for the applicant, so he'd like to be able to do it as well.
Actually, that was Michael Joyce, wasn't it?
Yeah, Mike Joyce.
Mike Joyce, not John necessarily, right, John?
Right, I think Mike will be better off sharing his screen.
Sure.
Okay. Now it says John Zimmer, but it's actually. Can you see that screen? If you can give it to that person, it's not John Zimmer. Michael, close enough. Okay. Yes, the screen says John Zimmer. In fact, it's not John, but that's the right screen. So the person there is Michael. Okay. Okay, good. Perfect. Thanks, Mike, very much. All right. Bye now. You both should be all set. Steve, you should be able to do it now. And Michael, you should be able to do it as well.
Okay, well, anything?
Nothing here.
Nothing there, huh? Isn't that curious?
You want me to give it a shot?
Go right ahead, please.
Yeah, I can't, it's saying I'm still disabled.
Yeah, and I am too. Huh. Isn't that curious?
Try him again.
Close
Hey,
off.
Mike, it looks like I have the ability to do it. Do you want to send me those figures?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
Do you guys need help here?
Yeah, Shane just joined.
Yes.
Oh,
Oh, perfect.
Shane, Steve Ibis here, and I think it's John Zimmer screen.
Yeah,
And we're trying to share screens, and I have not been able to do it.
that's
It
one
looks
second.
like I can share mine, but if you could give Michael Joyce the ability to do that, that would be great.
Yeah, 1 second here. No
Okay.
problem. You should be all set, Mike Joyce.
Let's give it a go. There it is. Perfect. Thank you.
We don't see anything, or I don't see anything.
It should be popping up in a second. Hold on. How are we doing?
Coming up.
it's coming through.
There we go.
Yep.
Oh,
Perfect.
good. Okay. Great.
All right, we good to go?
Yes.
All right. For the record, my name is John Zimmer with South River Environmental. Was the consulting wetland scientist that delineated the wetland resource areas within and adjacent to the property. If you look on the aerial to the left, it depicts the resource areas. If we start from the left side, there is an orange line that runs along the bank of Pope's Pond. That was a delineated bank. It basically runs adjacent to a walking path that extends along Pope's Pond and then continues down along Pine Tree Brook. The first series stops at the water control structure at Pope's Pond, and then I pick up another bank series that starts just to the other side of it, and that is inland bank associated with Pine Tree Brook, and that is a perennial stream coming out of the pond. So that has an associated 200-foot riverfront area, which you can also see depicted in the blue dashed lines. There really isn't a BVW on the side of that brook. It's a bank and then comes up to the walking trail and then extends, further away from the property. Now, the orange dashed line that's closest to the developed portion of the lot is a bordering vegetated wetland. It's basically a palustrin forested floodplain wetland. And I delineated the portion of that was closest to the subject property. The upland area between the developed portion of the lot and the wetland is disturbed over, kind of historic disturbance. There's piles of fill and things like that have begun to revegetate. A lot of the species that are present within that area are invasive. There's Japanese knotweed, multiflora rose, and some other species that are indicative of disturbed conditions. There's also bordering land subject to flooding associated with Pine Tree Brook, and Pope's Pond, but that does not just extend into the corner of the property and really doesn't come into the main developed portion of the lot. So
John, can I stop you there for a question?
absolutely.
I'm looking at the National Flood Hazard Layer Fermet. It's page 21 in the Notice of Intent. And it looks to me like there is the AE zone, which comes onto the property a little bit. And then there's another zone, which is indeed floodplain. that takes over probably 3/4 of the property. Do you have an opinion as to that floodplain?
That's the, this is Michael Joyce with Joyce Consulting Group. I believe that next section is the 500-year floodplain.
Well, yes, it's a wetland resource.
500-year floodplain.
Pardon?
The 100-year floodplain is, the 500 years not.
That's right. I will check that. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, sorry, John, go ahead.
No, no worries. That pretty much sums up the wetland resource areas within the property. As was mentioned before, there is 100-foot buffer zone that extends into the property. The riverfront area touches the edge of the property, but really doesn't extend into the developed portion. And as we said, the floodplain just nicks the corner. So, if there are any questions on the resource areas, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll hand it over to Mike to discuss the project.
One more question about that, John. In the notice of intent document, you don't check off riverfront area in the document itself.
That was, I did not check off riverfront area.
It is on the property.
I guess it is. The reason I didn't was because we weren't performing any work and it was such a small portion, but I can revise the document to include riverfront.
I think it should be.
Yeah, usually, well, not usually. The reason I didn't in this case was, like, as I said, because we weren't doing work in it, but I can certainly revise the documents to reflect that there is riverfront on the property.
Thank you.
Yep. And if the project does happen to be approved, it could also be checked off on the order of conditions as well.
Right.
Thank you, Steve, for catching that, for noticing it.
Well, that puts them to the alternatives analysis, of course. Just
Well,
kidding. Relax.
if there's no work proposed within the riverfront area, there's no
No
alternatives.
alternatives analysis. Right. I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
All right, thank you.
Wetlands humor.
Didn't think that existed.
Oh, it does. Stick around.
You're all night, right?
I don't know whether it's Michael or John, but can one of you respond to, and this is not necessarily a resource area question, but do you know what the groundwater elevation is in the site?
So we did perform test pits out on the site. The groundwater elevation. Let's see here. It varied pretty significantly depending on where you were on the site. For example, in the back it was elevation 92, which is about 4 feet below grade. So that's at the kind of the rear of the property. Then as you got closer to the street, it was roughly around between 4 and 5 feet below grade. Actually, it was fairly consistent in the test pits that we performed. So that's
those test pits there that we're looking at, the box.
Yeah, the kind of the hatched target looking areas. We performed 4 out there, 3 in the front and 1 at the rear of the building. If you like, I can give you a narrative of going over what's proposed and what's existing from an engineering standpoint and the work we're doing in the buffer, if that's okay with everybody.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Excuse me, do I remember there was a hydrological section in the document?
Yeah, so we did do a full stormwater report. We're running in parallel with our notice of intent application. We are also in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals currently. We've had 1 hearing with them, and we haven't received any review from the engineering department or a peer review, but we're anticipating receiving those in the next couple weeks. But we did do a full stormwater design, which I can touch on as we go through the presentation.
It's Appendix C. I just relocated it, the hydrological model.
Yeah, they're pretty much at the end of the application there. So as Scott and John touched on briefly, with the existing 2-acre lot at 485 Blue Hills Parkway, 485 to 47. There's 3 existing buildings on the site. The site also has driveways surrounding the existing buildings. There's 2 access points from Blue Hills Parkway, one on the northern side, one on the southern, with driveways surrounding the buildings. The site has a high point at the front of the site, and it's gradually slopes to the northwest corner. There's no real existing stormwater improvements, with the exception of a catch basin to the northwesterly corner. It's a leaching catch basin. It doesn't really provide much value as from a stormwater management standpoint. The stormwater flows over surface and then ultimately ends up on the conservation land associated with Pope's Pond and Pine Tree Brook. There is one residential abutter to the south, and then the remainder of the lot is abutted by the Milton Conservation Land and Blue Hills Parkway. So and then I have a few pictures. Well, you saw this one here.
Can you
And
provide some detail on the existing uses?
I can provide not much background. It was resident. There are residential buildings there, and then there's a large warehouse to the back. This is the warehouse here. It's my understanding that it used to be a ice warehouse back in the day, where they used to take the ice from Pope's Pond, bring it and store it in the existing warehouse. Then throughout the summer, transport it to residential dwellings for their coolers, refrigerators, so to speak.
Ice boxes.
Ice boxes, exactly. So at current day, I believe it's used more as a for equipment. Scott, I'm not sure exactly. Do you know any more about the use of the site today? I know in the past it's been used as a residence, and I don't know.
I know there has been residential use. Charlie, maybe you could chime in on that. I'm not exactly sure what it's currently being used for.
Yeah, the building that's closest to Blue Hill Parkway is still being used for residential use, although there's only a few people in that part. The large old barn is storage at the present time. The building to the left of the barn used to house office space. That has since been vacated. In the building to the rear left of the property is an old pool house that was, the best we can tell, was constructed sometime in the late 50s or 60s. But it's there's not a lot to it. Now, the barn, the garage, although there may have been some transportation of ice out of that barn was strictly used for carriages and equipment to move the ice from to around the town. The actual ice house itself was adjacent to Pope's Pond, essentially on the bank of the pond, to the west, a little bit south, and it was a much larger building. It was well over an acre in size. So what's left of these buildings now, there's not a lot of equipment or historical items left.
I think my question was more towards any oil or hazardous material storage, or has there been, or have you done any sort of a phase 1 site assessment work?
Yeah, we haven't found any evidence of fuel storage other than the heating for the various buildings.
Okay.
Sorry, I have some background noise. I apologize.
Well, I don't want to get into,
Is anyone else having trouble hearing Todd?
I am. I can't hear. It sounds like there's background noise.
Yeah, Todd, it seems like there's something wrong with your audio. Honestly, I wouldn't have even known you were talking if your name didn't pop up on the screen.
So to continue, my apologies. No oil or hazardous materials issues or the need for that you've identified.
We have not identified anything. There's like I said, there's the heating systems for the buildings themselves, but we haven't found anything below ground.
Hans, do you recall when we were out there most recently, which was probably a year ago or more, at the back building? I know there were a lot of fill pipes on the outside. They look like oil fill pipes, separate ones. You remember that?
So
I do, John. This is Steve. I
Yeah,
remember fill pipes.
you and Ingrid were there, and then I think
Yep.
We were there in twos, and I was there first, and then you and Ingrid came. I think I was there with Judith.
Yep.
And I just remember
were there as well.
building, there were fill pipes, and I didn't know if there was any kind of a 21E floating around that had been done at any point in the past. But there was an oil company there, wasn't there? The
McKeans ran their trucks out of there for several years, John. I think it must have been 10 or 15 years anyway that they ran their vehicles out of there. I haven't seen any oil filled pipes that would fill underground tanks, if that is what you're suggesting. There are pipes on the outside of the building that fill the inside tanks. But we have no plans and no evidence of underground storage tanks, if that's where the fill pipe, if that suggestion is where the fill pipes are going.
Yeah, no, I don't. I was just on the outside and I saw the fill pipes, so I have no idea what's inside, whether it's above ground or below ground. I don't have a clue.
Well, the tanks inside the rear building, there's several different heating systems in the barn. There's at least 3 separate heating systems, so they have 3 separate tanks at the barn itself.
And how big are those tanks?
I didn't measure them, John. They appear to be typical 110 to 220 gallon tanks. Your typical residential oil tank.
Okay. All right.
Actually, typical oil tanks are about 275s.
Okay, then I guess it must be 275, Steve's.
I know I have one. That's why. So.
All right. If I can take you back, I mean, the concern with potential oil contamination would be significant because of the water issues. And one of the reasons I asked you about what the groundwater elevation was is because I was interested in the detention pond. I guess it would be at the northeast side of the property, the site. And I just didn't know whether or not the groundwater testing, I don't know if you had, the borings or whatnot. I haven't read in detail what the borings looked like, but my concern is whether or not the detention basin as designed would be sufficient to take the runoff as it's depicted in the plans.
Yeah, and
given the elevation of the water.
And I'll get into that a little bit more as we go on. I'll touch on the stormwater system. It's not just the detention basin. There's also Caltech system proposed below the parking area, which is part of the reason we did the test pits, was to ensure that we maintain 2 feet of separation between the bottom of that system and groundwater. So Why don't I go ahead and finish, kind of run you through the site, and then if we can answer
Sure.
any questions about that as we
Fair
move
enough.
on. So just to close out the existing conditions, we just had a few aerial photographs kind of showing the site in relation to Pope's Pond and Pine Tree Brook, and the residential houses. So what we're proposing to do is to, as was mentioned earlier, construct a 52-unit residential building. In addition to the residences, there'll also be 2 commercial or retail units at the front of the building. The proposed building will have 2 separate parking areas accessed through the same northerly curb cut that's existing. There'll be parking in the upper area, and then there'll also be a driveway that accesses a below grade or garage level entrance that'll hold 34 interior garage spaces. So we'll have 2 separate areas of parking, one above and one below, and then they'll also both be accessed by this curb cut off of Blue Hill Parkway. And the driveway will basically follow the same path as the existing driveway. However, there's this encroachment of asphalt that goes over the Milton conservation land. That'll be removed, and the driveway will be pulled off of the property line. I believe it's about 4 feet off the property line at the front of the property and 7 feet off the property line at the rear of the property. So that asphalt will be removed from the site. It's about 1,100 square feet of asphalt. So in order to design the site,
What will be the setback after it's pulled back?
it'll be about 4 feet from the property line at the driveway and about 7 feet back at the rear of the driveway.
Oh,
So
that is proposed. I'm sorry. I thought you meant that other than the encroachment, that's what the existing condition is, but that's the proposed condition.
that's the proposed, and it pulls you can kind of see that the edge of the driveway runs, existing is kind of where the cursor runs, and it bumps out pretty good. I imagine, there was just creep over the years of the trucks swinging around the garage. They probably took the turn wide, and just historically that driveway just kind of expanded as it was being used. So
Can I interrupt and just go back a second
Yep.
to the parking? You said 34 interior spaces below grade,
right,
and how many exterior spaces?
there are 35. I believe there's 43 exterior spaces.
All right, and the interior one, what's the bottom? I mean, how deep are you going to go?
So they're actually the proposed garage slab will be approximately the same as the existing garage slab. It's about a foot lower, so it's more or less the same elevation that's existing. We're trying to work with the existing grade as it slopes to the rear. So there'll be garage under, but only in the portion that's parallel to the street. So the kind of the L portion of the building that's parallel to the street, there'll be garage under on that. And then as you move forward, I believe there's a half basement. Is that right, Charlie, on the front?
Well, the portion that heads towards Blue Hill Parkway, that's full basement, but it's residential basement, meaning some of it is for the commercial space. And then the other area will be for mechanicals. So you'll have parking essentially going from north to south in the L, and then east to west, that section of the building will be for mechanicals and for storage for the commercial space.
Where is the commercial space? I know you said front, but I don't know whether you mean front closest to the parkway or front as in facing the parkway.
Yeah, right where he has the cursor, John, we have 2 commercial spaces going right in the front of the building.
Understood, thank you.
And how big are the commercial spaces?
I believe it's about 2,000 square feet total between the two of them, 2,500.
Yeah, we're about 2,400 combined. Now, it may end up being one commercial space, but it's cut into two right now in the design.
Are they both at ground level?
Yeah, so they will be at the elevation above the Blue Hill Parkway. So Mike, can you pull up the elevation in front of that building? If you can just zoom in on the front of the Blue Hill Parkway side.
You just mean on the plan here?
Yeah. So the elevation, you'd come off Blue Hill Parkway, and Blue Hill Parkway is around 100, I believe, and finished floor is roughly 104, 105. So it's about 5 feet higher than Blue Hill Parkway.
Okay. And what type of commercial do you anticipate being in there?
Well, that's a long way off, but our hope was that we would have some sort of gourmet coffee shop, sandwich shop, gourmet small market type of thing. We have spoken with at least one interested party, but quite honestly, that was before we got hit with the COVID mess. And I think it would be premature to promise anything until we know how this all ends up.
Of course.
But how do you figure your parking? Are you relating it to the 52 residential units, or are you relating it to both the residential units and the customer population for the retail outfits?
This commercial space is so small, John, that the estimate is only to need 4 to 6 spaces at most for the commercial. So it's not really a marketplace as we would think of Milton Marketplace. It's a coffee shop, gourmet sandwich shop type of thing.
And how many parking spaces total are in the lot?
We're roughly 42 in the lot, and we're in the I think we're in the 30s in the basement, Mike, right? 32,
34 in the basement.
34.
Okay.
And we have charging stations in the exterior parking location for EV vehicles.
Oh, cool. So is the number of parking spots compliant with the planning board regulations?
Well, this is a zoning board approval process. But we have worked with the ZBA and the planning board, or the select board, and with Mass Housing on the volume of spots.
Yeah, that's a concern, because if you get pushed on your parking, you're going to have more impervious space.
Right.
And my concern is you've got 77, if you're 34 interior and 43 outside, that's 77 parking spots for 52 units. And then where do the 4 to 6 go for? And 4 to 6 doesn't sound like a lot of parking for 2 retail outfits. Are those 4 to 6 allocated to the retail spaces? Are they part of the 77, or are they in addition?
Correct. They are part of the 77. We have the option to increase the parking under the north to south wing, the east to west wing, if required.
And where does the snow go?
Well, we have a lot of room around the back of the building, the east to west portion of the building, for snow storage.
Will that have to be taken from the front and then moved to the back? Is that correct?
That would be the assumption.
Mhm.
Is there a reason why there's no parking behind the east to west wing?
Yeah, no particular reason at this point. If we had to increase or get some spots from back there, there's plenty of room.
Mhm.
But this parking volume count is not something that, this is something that we've worked with for close to a year now.
So to be clear, on the back of the building, you're actually reducing the impervious area there, right?
Yeah, if you can, so I don't know if you noticed from the aerial views, but there's the hard packed gravel area. It's in the back here. that's all going to go away and be loamed and seeded under this plan. Like Charlie said, there is the ability to potentially put parking in the rear here. I think we were trying to minimize the footprint and preserve some green space, but there is the opportunity if need be. But I think there's been a lot of behind the scenes work that Charlie's done on parking and determining a number that they think with mass housing will fit the development. I think I don't know if this is always true, but I feel like a lot of times in our designs we have a tendency to over design the parking, which is kind of a shame when it comes to kind of open space and that sort of thing. But that's obviously not always the case. So,
Well, if you could stay with parking for a minute, and one of the issues that come up in the past, and when I say the past, there was a previous application, at least at the informational stage. I don't actually recall, but there was an alternative design also by the McKean brothers. And at that time, we were talking about public access to the Pope's Pond area, and we're very concerned with a walking trail around the pond, all the way around. In fact, I don't know whether or not you've seen it. I thought the Conservation Commission had given a list of sort of a wish list to the Housing Eligibility Committee.
Yes.
Now I'm not sure that it ever made it, but we have now submitted the same wish list to the ZBA. And one of the points on the wish list was that public access to the Pope Pond area. And I don't know if you've designed that in here. I can't tell from the plans whether or not there's some public access there. And secondly, whether or not that public access would require some additional parking places for the public. Obviously, it would be an access for the people that live there, but a true public access would have other members of the public in a position to actually enjoy the area surrounding Pope's Pond. So I guess there are two questions. One, do you have designed in public access to the pond? And two, do you have any parking concerns about that public access?
Yes, John, this is Charlie. So we received the list from the ZBA maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. Regarding this, you called it a wish list.
I don't know.
Well, a lot of the items are items that, quite frankly, we spoke about in the past, and we understand the need for access to Pope's Pond. What we envision is filing another NOI, a second NOI. Simply because we have to cross Town of Milton land, or the proposal would be to impact Town of Milton land, then also impact and cross conservation land on top of an existing town water easement. So if you look at the north property line and you run east to west, so from the east side, which is the east side is the Blue Hill Parkway side. Okay, now go back to
I was just going to bring up the existing conditions plan. It's a little clearer there. The easement here.
Well, yeah, so there's the water easement, and it runs out to Pope's Pond and across Pine Tree to the subdivision on the other side. What we would propose with another NOI. So, Mike, stop where you are there. No. Yeah. So along the Blue Hill Parkway side, the north property line, the first half heading east to west, the first half belongs to the town of Milton. It is not governed by conservation. Then the second half of the run going east to west is governed by conservation. And the rest of the run out to Pope's Pond is governed by conservation.
But when you say governed by conservation, are you talking about?
It's owned by the Conservation Commission.
Okay.
On the town's records.
Correct. All right. I just wanted to distinguish between deed ownership as opposed to jurisdictional.
I'm speaking strictly to ownership. One's the town of Milton, which is the east side. The west side is owned on record by Conservation Commission.
Right. That's
And then
my-
the west side out to Pope's is owned by the Conservation Commission. What we would propose, and this will be in a separate NOI, but I guess for informational purposes, we can discuss this. The north property line, the first part that's essentially owned by the town of Milton, we would propose improving, come to the east a little bit, Mike, to the east. That's west. Yep. That area there, we would propose parking for town residents and anyone that wants to walk out to Pope's Pond. Improve the easement off our property line, so from the west property line, continuing west to Pope's, on top of the water easement is removing the invasive species and improving a walking path out to Pope's Pond where the bridge is.
On your property over the easement, or are you talking about on our property?
Now that's conservation.
I know.
That's owned by the conservation. So we would propose in a separate NOI to improve that water easement. Speaking with the other town officials, the access to that easement is precarious at best at this point. If there was ever a water main break, they'd have to go in and rip all that up anyway. So what we would propose is to create a walking path from the west property line, somewhere in there, on top of the water easement, improve the water easement, make it a walking path. And what we envisioned were that residents could come and park in the parking that's on the east side of the project, that's on the town land. Exactly, Mike. And get a sandwich or get coffee or just to take a walk. Then they could walk down the driveway to the walking path and access the pond.
That seems smart.
You need the town to build a parking, or maybe you're going to do it. But
No. We're willing to do the work
on our land,
on the town's land, conservation and the town.
Would you maintain the parking spaces as well?
Yes, we would.
In the same way that you maintain the rest of the parking on the property?
Yes.
So just so I'm clear, because we all know that there's a walking path that abuts the Pine Tree Brook that's currently there, but you're talking about a walking path on your land. On the top of the easement. It sounds like that's where you want it to be.
Exactly. Where Mike has the cursor now is where we'd be proposing the improved walking path, because once we build the proposed driveway, we're improving on top of the water easement.
So you want to put the driveway on top of the water easement?
The existing driveway's on the water easement.
And how many car parking on the town property?
Well, I think that's a conversation between all of us, the Conservation Commission and the town. I think we would welcome the conservation's input on how many cars do you think we need to park there?
Mm-hmm.
So we definitely.
Is it 10 or is it 20?
We do definitely appreciate the proposal. I think
That's
a great idea.
That's one of the issues. I mean, that's why I asked you about the 77 units you've got, parking spaces you've got for 52 units. That's a very small ratio. Some of the other projects we're looking at have, 1.7 per unit for cars. But you've got two retail outfits, and I think that the 4 to 6 is unreasonable. But now you're asking to have the town devote space to your benefit.
We don't, technically, John, we don't need the parking for our project. We're not, if the town wanted 5 spots, we could give them 5 spots. This is a gesture to the Conservation Commission and the town. That would benefit the residents, that if people want to have access to Pope's in a safe parking area, we're welcome to improving a location for that to happen.
Impervious parking or not?
I think that's a conversation with you, Steve, in the Conservation Commission. That what would you think is best? Is it pervious paving? Is it gravel, or is it asphalt, or is it turf pave?
Yeah, I would like the latter, actually, myself, just off the top of my head. One of the GeoGrid products, perhaps, we could try?
There's a dozen products out there that could be proposed that would be pervious, and we could let the grass grow through it. There's many options.
Right.
All right, well, it was my understanding on the first project proposed by the same owner, and I know Charlie's the developer, but the McKeans they're still in the application. And it was very clear to me and to the Conservation Commission, albeit at an informational session, and their counsel was very articulate in saying that the public access would be provided through the property. And it sounds like you're using an easement to provide that access, but part of that access is public parking. But you need to put the parking outside of the proposed site. And that looks like you're using somebody else's land to facilitate that public access. Always my understanding would be part and parcel of whatever the building project was.
Well, I think part of the challenge is for many people that have looked at the project is they've been educated on a previous project that this is nothing like the previous project. It has no significant relationship in any way to the previous project. The previous project was essentially commercial space with some residential above. This is just a very small commercial space. Think of the old Bents in the residential.
Question, why couldn't you put the public parking back there at the southwest corner?
So I'm not to interrupt, but I almost feel like these are kind of conversations. I know they're linked together, but in recognizing that we'll have an additional NOI filed for this access and parking area, is it possible to move ahead with this application and address that at the next hearing? I don't want to step on anyone's toes.
Actually, I would like you to answer me. Why not the parking at that southwest corner?
There's no way we're going to separate this into two NOIs. That is, approve one and hope for the best in the next one.
Right.
Public access is tied directly to this application.
Exactly. That's how I feel about it. That's why I asked the question, John.
I think one of the issues that we're facing is it's almost a bit premature at this point to kind of be speculating on, what potentially there's conversations that need to take place with a bunch of interested parties, the selectmen, obviously the Conservation Commission. We're currently in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals. We don't have peer review. We're kind of in the beginning of the process. So it's almost premature. We'd envision kind of concentrating on this NOI, which is primarily essentially a buffer project with, de minimis changes, and kind of addressing those as, the project moves forward, those conversations with the selectmen, getting all of those parties kind of together on the same page. It's hard right now for us to kind of design this project when a lot of the interested parties obviously aren't here, and the project is still kind of developing through the process.
So why don't you go through the process and come back to us, Scott? We're going to have to go out and look at the wetlands flags anyway. It's going to take, it could be May anyway, right? Before the snow disappears.
Well,
I'm asking the question.
We have a delineation, and now I know that you're obviously want to verify the line.
That's right, and we want to verify the line without the snow. Very important.
you could always, of course, and I'm not telling you can do that or should do this, but you always have the ability to verify the line later as a condition of approval, that it's subject to, once the snow melts, a verification. I'm just saying.
Why should we do that?
But as I said, we're working through this process. We're getting the line. Once we have the line on this approval, then when we file a second NOI, which once some of those issues have worked themselves out, we'll be back. We'll have most of the line set at that point as well. So
I'm still asking, why no parking in the southwest corner? Nobody's answered that question.
Well, I think that we can certainly look at that, Steve. I don't think no one has said that that's not possible. I think earlier in our conversation, I said that there was possibility of putting parking on the west side of the building. So it's certainly worth looking at.
Yeah, you could save the town's land and put it on your land instead. I mean, that's what I'm looking at. I mean, why put it on the town's land? It's your benefit. It's to your benefit. Why don't you put the stuff to your benefit on your property?
Well, let's make something perfectly clear. We're not looking for this access solely for the project's benefit. These suggestions for these improvements have come about over dozens of conversations with various town officials.
Except
Steve, if I may, various town officials that have said, "Hey, we'd like to see this."
On meeting.
That's what I was wondering. Okay,
Yeah.
fine. Yeah.
That'd be great. Thanks. We'll do. Appreciate it.
We were listening, Arthur.
So this proposal that we discussed, that's not, we haven't put on paper, is a result of, like I said, dozens of conversations with various town officials. If it turns out that the parking's best to put on the west side of the building, it's less of an impact for us, quite frankly.
Right. I'm lost now. What do you mean it's less?
Well, we're not maintaining town property, John.
Okay.
Right? We'd be maintaining our own property. Right? Governed by our own, we'd have one company, one criteria. So it would essentially be easier for us if that were the case. And so we're not opposed to it. What we have just suggested is a result of many conversations, and the conversations are still ongoing.
Okay, well, I'm suggesting it from the conservation side. John, do you agree?
Yeah, no, I do. I don't think you can use somebody else's land to improve your, the viability of your project. I think you've got to do it within the confines of your property. But
Particularly
we can put that aside. I mean, we don't want to get stuck on this point, but at least in your mind, in terms of planning, that would be important to see whether or not that public access is a big issue for us. And it seems like you're pushing it into our land, at least a part of that public access, you're pushing it into our land. And when I say our, I'm talking about both the town deeded land and the Conservation Commission deeded land. I'm not even talking the jurisdictional part of the Conservation Commission.
Well, we don't have to push that parking into the town property. And the wish list that I read looked that the Conservation Commission had discussed clearing out the invasive species and the path for it was the intent of that response to improve where the water easement is, John, for access, or how would the conservation like to see that?
No, we didn't have anything designed or even proposed as to how the access would be provided. It was more of a concept that I thought was acceptable to the applicant. That I thought we were enthusiastic about public access, and I thought the applicant, and it's essentially the same applicant, was enthusiastic about it. It's just, how we get it done.
Sure.
Let me ask you another question.
John, if I may, John,
Yes.
if I may, how can we approve something when the zoning board hasn't approved it? Aren't we kind of getting ahead of ourselves in that regard? I mean, the year and a half I've been on, we've always been sort of the last in line for the approval of what everybody else has approved, all the other zoning boards and planning and so on and so forth. I mean, it's great that we're having this conversation, but isn't it a little premature? And that's more for, just informing me as sort of the rookie here.
Well, I can tell you this, Jerry, and that the question may have been to Scott, but I can jump in and say that in the past, very often it goes to the ZBA for the comprehensive permit first, and then they come to us.
Yeah.
For instance, if the ZBA said, no, you've got to have, twice the number of parking spaces, and then that's what would have to come back to us eventually.
Yeah.
The interesting thing here is that until they have the comprehensive permit, then the town bylaw still applies. It's only after the issuance of the comprehensive permit that the municipality is sort of overridden and only the state standards apply. And an example of that would be the 25-foot non-disturbance zone.
Yeah.
But we haven't talked about that. So I think it's legitimately before us at this point. But you're 100% correct that there could be changes made by the ZBA in the issuance of the comprehensive permit if it's so issued, that would then affect that which we have before us. It's a little bit like the chicken and egg. Scott, your experience may be different, and it probably is because you deal with other towns.
This is one of the first times I've seen it done like this. So we applied for the comprehensive permit with the ZBA. They requested that we submit the NOI for your review. I mean, essentially it is just all of the improvements would be within that 100-foot buffer, which wouldn't necessarily be kind of, these improvements in that area wouldn't be within the state jurisdictional kind of regulations. So I think they want the board's input or the commission's input on, their overall feeling on the project, but they were the ones that requested that we come before you and get your input on the project and apply for the NOI.
Right.
On a separate note, you had mentioned additional notice of intent. Do you anticipate any?
Hans, can you speak up a little bit, please?
Sorry about that. Do you anticipate any traffic improvements on Blue Hills Parkway for the trips or to the number of vehicles that are going to be coming in and out of there?
We're currently in that process. So as we said, we submitted a traffic report. It's in the peer review process right now. As far as actual improvements, the sight lines are actually very good coming out of that driveway. The trips generated from, this size project don't really have much of an impact. So there's no like additional turn lanes being, proposed for the center median strip. So as far as the overall layout or anything like that, there's not really any improvements being proposed at this point. But as I said, it's we submitted the report. It's under peer review right now by the ZBA's traffic expert. So we'll be getting feedback hopefully in the next couple of weeks.
Can I ask, it may be a little bit off point, but there was one thing that I noticed in some of the plans. I saw the existence of trees implicated. And then I actually looked at page, where is it? 6 of your
That's
narrative.
6.1, John, you're talking about?
6.1, it says the project area will be cleared of one shrub. That doesn't seem to match what I see in the plans, which show, at least in the current conditions, some big trees out front. And then in the plan that we're looking at right here, it looks like a lot of that's going to be turned into parking areas.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a typo in the report. There will be, actually, you can see on this plan here, there's about 5 trees that will be removed within the parking area. And those really, I think those are the only trees that will be removed. They're a mix of scrub. I think they're mainly scrub pine. There are some large ones. There's been a couple, I guess, that have come down over the past couple years, and some that needed to come down because they haven't been in the greatest condition. But those trees in the parking area would have to come down.
All right, and I had another question as well. Under 4.2, you talk about temporary erosion controls of staked straw wattles. Then you go to the next page, and I look at 6.2, and it says silt fence and hay bales. It seems to be inconsistent, and I didn't know if that was.
Yeah, the intention is to use staked straw wattles along the downslope side, as shown, I believe, in the erosion and control plan, demolition erosion and control plan.
Mike, is that wattles or mulch socks? Wattles don't work. They simply don't work.
Yeah,
Well,
there-
if under the direction of the commission, we can certainly do mulch socks.
Mulch
That's not,
sock works.
Yeah.
Straw wattles never work.
sure.
Okay. John, I've got a couple other, on 6.3, you've got two sections, 6.3, Mike. Okay. And they both have the words days end without any apostrophe. I'd love to see them change. I'm serious. I'd love to see them change to each work days end with an apostrophe between the Y and the S.
That's a side effect of me being an engineer. My grammar is not up
That's
to par,
okay.
but I can certainly, whatever verbiage you would prefer, I can revise it as necessary. Let me just run through, we haven't even touched on the drainage yet. Let me just run through that real quick while I have this sheet up. So the proposed parking lots will be collected by deep sump catch basins located in the upper parking area. And they'll be directed to a infiltration system with isolator rows. In addition to that, the rooftop will be collected and directed to the isolator rows. The infiltration area. That infiltration area will overflow via 12-inch HDPE out to the rear of the property to this detention area. During the large storm events, that will overflow and surface flow to the conservation area, similar to the way the stormwater flows now. During all storm events, the runoff will be decreased, the 210, 25, and 100-year storm. There'll be infiltration within the Caltech chambers below the parking lot. There are 45 SC 740 chambers proposed below the parking area. And then the area of the driveway that accesses the garage will be collected by a storm scepter catch basin, treated and overflow to that detention area as well. The work within the buffer area really consists of the proposed driveway. There'll be no proposed work within the flood zone or the riverfront area. The proposed impact to the buffer, there's an increase of approximately 150 square feet of impervious area throughout the whole buffer. And with our proposed project, the stormwater that's now currently untreated running off the site will be treated. That's really the extent of the stormwater. In addition to that, we'll also be connecting to sewer. Currently, there's a myriad of septic tanks and cesspools out there. They'll obviously be removed, and the proposed project will be tied into the sewer system, providing benefit as well. So that's really, from a stormwater standpoint, I just wanted to get that in there before we got too far off track. That's what's proposed. If there's any questions on the stormwater system itself, I'd be happy to answer those.
Catch basin that you mentioned that's off property. Is there going to be any you're just gonna leave that as is, or is that?
I was assuming that would be removed when we remove the asphalt, but if you wanted it left in place, yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, that was the assumption was that that would be removed at the same time as the asphalt, or if not removed, filled with crushed stone and covered up. I guess whatever the commission prefers. And I should mention that the work within the buffer gets no closer than 50 feet to the bordering vegetative wetland. I think the edge of asphalt existing is 48 and the proposed offset is 51 or 52 feet. So it's all within that 50-foot range as far as being offset from the bordering vegetative wetland. So the proposed project gets no closer than 50 feet to any resource area, and it reduces or increases impervious area within the 100-foot buffer by approximately 160 square feet.
Following that up, section 5.1, there's a statement that says the project complies with the performance standards of the Wetlands Protection Act for work proposed within the resource areas and buffers. That's all it says. I'd like to have that section expanded. Which values and functions and which standards are you talking about, and how you're going to address them? Okay, so that's a normal thing to do. Performance standards discussion is just a statement. How do we know that statement's correct? Tell us. Give us some detail for each one of the performance standards, okay?
Along that line, can you just help me out? I'm looking at the Cultex chambers in the front, in the center of the parking area.
Yes.
And I'm trying to figure out where does that water go? And then I'm looking at the rain garden at the rear of the property, close to the Pope's Pond. Is there any kind of connection between the two, or?
There is, yeah. There's a 12-inch HDPE pipe that, so it comes out of the Cultex system, goes into the outlet control structure within that parking lot, that upper parking lot.
Yes.
And then that pipe drops and it outlets to the rain garden, it directly from that outlet control structure to the rain garden. I didn't model it, but I'd have to take a look, but there is the rain gardens there more as a aesthetic feature. I could look at it. We may not even need it, but I think it was something that we wanted to offer as an aesthetic feature at the rear of the property.
Have you considered moving the rain garden to the front of the property so that it could be viewed by the public?
So we did have the consideration early on. I did have one at the front of the property. The only problem is it's the high point, so there's no real good way to get stormwater there. Initially, it was trying to grab stormwater from one of the catch basins at the front and direct it to the rain garden, but it wasn't working from an elevation standpoint because the elevation does drop off towards Blue Hill Parkway as well.
Mr. Joyce, are you familiar with the rain garden that's in the center of the parking lot of the Milton Public Library?
I'm not, but I can certainly drive by it.
It seems to me like this site would be a wonderful opportunity for something just like that.
Yeah, I can certainly take a look at that.
Yeah, what I'm envisioning is replacing the stormwater system that you have underneath the current parking lot and replacing it with like a center island rain garden, which would then become, a landscaping feature as well as stormwater management tool. And to replace the loss of parking that rain garden would take up, then maybe put those behind the east-west wing of the building.
Yeah, that's something we could. So it's probably something similar to like a country open curb type rain garden. Is that
Yes.
how it flows in surface and it's treated, then has maybe a lower outlet or something like that?
Exactly. It's worth a drive by to the library. It's really quite beautiful all seasons of the year.
I'm going to ask a question, and it's not a leading question at all. I'm actually just curious. Why do you have no parking in the back? And it may be because it's right next to a beautiful, natural resource, Pope's Pond.
Yeah,
But I don't know.
honestly, we haven't explored putting parking back there because I think the work Charlie did up front, we felt like we had enough parking for the proposed use. But that, like you said, that is, and it's, from my standpoint, it was refreshing to have a little bit more green space than maybe you usually see at the back of or on a development property. But there certainly is space back there that could be utilized for parking if we feel it's needed, and if it's not a steeply sloped area or anything. There's no real nothing really there to prevent that placing anything there. And we could shift the rain garden as well around that sort of thing. So
It would seem to me that parking in the rear of the building would be further away from any of the wetlands. Is that correct, Steve?
Except for Pope's Pond. You're getting within the 200-foot buffer there, right at the corner. But you could put.
Oh, go ahead. There it is.
You could put some of the GeoGrid products in there, or some kind of pervious parking area as well. That grass could grow up through, and that would make a lot of sense actually there.
I think that would be fantastic. I mean, to be honest, this site just screams of opportunity to be a public outreach exhibition site. There's so many opportunities for low impact development and green infrastructure that we could do. We're talking about the porous pavement and the pavers and the rain gardens, and it would be wonderful if we could maybe also incorporate some educational signage that, to let the public know when they're there on site for these retail places, grabbing their sandwich and their cup of coffee. Oh, look.
And it would be
they're
very
doing their
consistent
stormwater.
with the intended design of the parkway historically.
I'm sorry, what was that, Arthur?
It would be very consistent with the intended design of the parkway.
Absolutely.
This is a parkway to the Blue Hills. It's always, since the outset of the design, been environmentally oriented. And that's a beautiful congruence that you put forward.
I just have visions of hordes of high school students walking down the hill after school's out, once school is back, and walking in and getting a sandwich or a cup of coffee, and then walking over to the pond from there. And if we can maybe educate a little bit along the way, well, isn't that great?
All right, good points. All right, how do we move this along? And I don't mean to cut you off, Michael or Scott or John or whomever, but what's the next step, or what more can you tell us about the project right now that you think we should know, and then what are the next steps?
I don't know if Michael has anything else to address. I mean, we're currently, as I said, we're awaiting, our peer review responses. So, some of the issues that were brought up this evening, are going to be subject to the ZBA review and approval process. So, we're waiting to hear back on that. I assume we'll have those pretty soon. I know that there were some comments on the application form and some, cleanup that probably needs to be done. So I would assume Mike can reach out to Steve and hopefully work through some of those issues. And I think that's where we are right now. I don't know if the commission wants to kind of continue the hearing at this point. I think we're kind of awaiting some additional information on our side, as part of the comprehensive permit project. process. So,
Well, we need your assent to continue the hearing, which I think is appropriate from all perspectives. You may want more time to see what progress you make on things like, the number of parking spaces and where you put them. And also gather more information about the use of the town land. My take on this, we should approve a notice of intent that works on its own merits and not wait for a subsequent notice of intent to kind of buttress this one. I think this should rise or fall on its own merits. So I'd like to keep, all of the contingencies and conditions in this one right here. There may be, a separate issue on use of town land, but I just like this one to rise or fall on its own merits. And that public access to the pond, I think you appreciate is very important to us. And as Wendy just stated very articulately, that this may create an opportunity. And it may be as simple as putting a rain garden in an area where people can see it and enjoy it and appreciate it. And we do need to see the wetland flags, and we probably want to wait until the snow disappears so we can see them. So would it make sense to continue this for 2 months as opposed to 1 month? I'm not trying to slow it down at all. That's a point of pride for us. We're not trying to delay anything, but it may make sense to get 2 months worth of information and the ability for us to get out and see the flags. What makes sense to you? I'm not pushing for that, but I'm just asking what the consensus is as to what's the most efficient continuance date.
Go ahead, Scott.
oh no, go ahead. I was going to actually ask kind of.
So I think I guess this is just my, Charlie, cut me off whenever you want, but I almost feel like if we could get on the next agenda and then potentially continue, if we're supposed to be getting review comments from the peer reviewer. Sorry, I'm just looking at my calendar here. Within the week, I believe we're on the February 23rd. Is that right, Scott? Agenda for the zoning board?
That's correct. Yep.
So we should have some information next time the hearing comes around about how the project has changed or not. The guidance we've gotten from ZBA and even the peer review and engineering comments. So we could have a significantly different project in a month, looking at least.
That's fine.
And if we don't, we could request a continuance prior to the meeting, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that makes good sense. Steve, what's our March date?
March 9.
March 9th. All right. So are there any other questions or comments from commissioners? And I'll wait to see if there are any. And then I should ask whether or not there are any comments or questions from members of the public, abutters or any member of the public. Hearing none, with the assent of the applicant, we will continue this until March 9th at our next meeting. Good?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, we're back. So we're now having reversed the agenda. We're now back to number 1 on the agenda, which is Milton Academy, Gun Hill Street.
And I'd like to share the screen. Can anybody see that? No?
No.
Uh-oh.
I see that Greg Hockmuth has joined us, so.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everyone, for putting us on second.
Oh, great. I'm glad you're here.
Sure. Is anybody at the Milton Access TV?
Yeah. Hi, Steve. You have permission to share, so you should make sure you have the window open that you want to share before you hit share screen.
Well, I did, and I did. So let me go back and cancel that. I've got to cancel some tabs here, Mike. Okay, I've got one thing open, but then I don't see share screen. Okay, that's my issue. I don't see.
If it's helpful, I can try to share the plan on my screen.
Yeah, well, I should be able to do it from here, Mike. Mike Lynch.
Yeah, it should be at the bottom of your screen, Steve.
Um,
The share screen would be.
oh, wait. Hang on. Share screen. I think I've just found it. And I'm hitting it and nothing happens. Yep. Yep. Share screen.
I'm glad I'm not the only technologically challenged individual.
Multiple participants. One participant can share at a time. Okay. Share screen. And I'm hitting share screen and nothing happens.
It's possible that John Zimmer is still holding the shared screen.
I don't know. Let me try it again. Okay, I've got it up on the screen, on my screen, but I want to share. Okay. Moving it to the side.
Is Michael Lynch on or Shane? Doesn't sound it.
Hey, here
There we go.
You're making progress. There you go.
There
All
we
right.
go.
Am I? Can you see that?
Yes, I take back everything I said about technologically challenged.
Ah,
You're doing great, Steve.
okay, we're getting there. We're getting there. I'm gonna move this away. Try to move this over. Why can't I move that over? There we go. How's that?
Wonderful.
Okay.
Great.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I have to tell you, I started a hearing several weeks ago with the Board of Appeals, and there was a problem with the computers at Town Hall, and nobody was monitoring the raise hand function.
Oh,
And I had my hand raised and was never recognized because nobody was following that. And my cell phone blew up with client, where are you? Why aren't you talking? So the joy of Zoom is really quite something.
True enough.
Right.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Ned Corcoran, attorney in Quincy, live here in Milton, representing Milton Academy. I'm joined by Greg Huckmuth with Williams and Sparagus, who's our wetland scientist, Brandon Fagan, who's a licensed site professional, I think has a lot of experience with this board, and Nick Parnell from the Academy. We're here, I think, as a continuation of the enforcement order that was filed, as well as to start a hearing on the notice of intent, which was filed relative to remedial plans that we have submitted to the commission for consideration relative to remediating the issues around the slope as it heads into towards the riverbank for Unquity Brook and the wetland. It's helpful that Steve has put this plan up because it identifies a number of lines. The blue line, I think, at the top is the edge of the river, the bank of river. The green line would be the edge of wetland.
That's correct.
The red line would be the 25-foot no disturb from the edge of wetland. And then the pale lines further down is a pinkish line, which is the 100-foot setback from the edge of wetland. And the blue line across is the 200-foot setback from the riverbank or the edge of river. It's pretty good for a lay guy. And it's interesting that the 100-foot wetland setback line and the 200 riverbank setback line really sort of merge with each other. They parallel each other and then cross each other in the middle. And those obviously define the limits of this commission's jurisdiction relative to activity. This is a site that has a long history, as we've discovered. Milton Academy has owned this property for a significant amount of time. And the plateau, if you will, which is sort of the top of slope coming to the bottom of the screen, has really existed there for quite a long time. Our research indicates that has been there since at least the early 1990s, if not before. And that the area to the south, the bottom of the plan is area that the Academy has used fairly extensively, and I know with not 100% popularity, to conduct maintenance activities associated with its bigger campus. It's a large campus, as you know, not a lot of area on its campus to store materials, to spread materials. You know, they have lawns, fields to mow, trees to maintain, and they use that as as an area to place and then either create mulch or do other activities. Over time, and the slope as it exists from the top of the slope, which is outside of the jurisdiction of the commission, down the hill, if you will, is approximately a 1-to-1 slope, fairly steep, been there for a while, and has begun to show signs of stress, particularly with organic materials now degrading and sloughing towards the wetland. And that's an issue that obviously was brought to our attention, the Academy's attention by this commission, and it's certainly something that the Academy is paying very careful attention to and has a strong desire to work with the commission to remediate as soon as effectively as possible. What I'd like to do, so in what's not shown on this plan, what you see on this plan, and Greg Hockmuth can speak more specifically, is a set of proposed new tree plantings at the head of slope. Those would all be new trees. There are some existing pine trees that aren't shown on this plan, but I think are visible on the aerial that we've submitted in the past, that actually are lined sort of parallel to the trees that you see on this plan, but between these trees and the 100-foot and 200-foot setback lines. And those trees were planted at Mr. Hockmuth's direction at the request of the Academy in 2012, and they were intended to demarc an area beyond which the Academy and its activities would not extend. They were concerned about making sure that none of their activities would be in any way encroaching towards the wetlands. We understand that the Academy has been pretty devout, if you will, in paying attention to those commandments. But those trees, I think, have shown some sign of stress as well. And so the plan would be to remove and replace with a more vigorous set of plans and to alter the slope, cut back the slope, and as Mr. Hockmuth will explain in a moment. There was a set of discussions that we're aware of that took place in 2015 relative to plans that the school had to install a fairly significant solar power array on the plateau. There were discussions with the select board, I think representatives of the commission at the time, the Milton Cemetery, and abutters. And for reasons I think were associated with concerns addressed by the cemetery in particular, the school pulled back on those plans. So obviously there is no solar array present, but those were specific conversations that were held, as I said, in 2015. So with that brief history, as I understand, and the last thing I would say is that this is an important property for the Academy. The Academy does need to take advantage of the property for storage, for its maintenance activities, certainly paying attention to the limits of jurisdiction and pulling with a desire to stay as far away from that as reasonable. So with that, what I'd like to do is hand it to Greg Hockmuth from Williams and Sparagus. He's our wetland scientist. He's developed a plan that's subject to the notice of intent. And from there, I'll hand it to Brandon Fagan, who'll talk more specifically about some testing protocols, material characterization that would be necessary for the removal of any materials from the site They would have to be properly characterized under the Massachusetts contingency plan. He's experienced with that, and he would direct and lead that effort on our behalf. So if I can turn this over to Mr. Hockmuth, I would appreciate that.
Thank you, Ned. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. Greg Hockmuth from Williams and Sparagus, representing Milton Academy for the notice of intent filed for the Gun Hill property that they own. Again, thank you for delaying this hearing until the second item on the agenda. Ned summed it up pretty nicely. I first got involved with the school probably sometime around 2011. And my role at that time was to assist them with some invasive species management around O'Hare Pond down near the track. I think one of the landscape crews got a little overzealous and knocked down some plantings. And as a result, the area over there became riddled with invasives. So I got to know Dennis Glynn at the time, who was in charge. And Dennis said, "Hey, you got a few minutes?" And he brought me up to Gun Hill. He said, I need to pick your brain on something up here. And I said, sure. So we went up to the Gun Hill site and he showed me the slope at that point in time. And he said, we got to do something about this. It's starting to crumble. And, you know, the kids use this path down here and it's not real safe. And I said, well, what did you have in mind? He said, well, that's what I want you to tell me. I said, well, it's very steep. And even back then it was very steep, probably close to 1-to-1 back then. And from what I can tell, it looked like mostly leaves and landscape debris. And he said, well, I need to do a couple things. I need to prevent people from getting close to the edge, and I want to try to hold the slope. And at that time, the area was riddled with Virginia creeper. It seemed to do really well out there. And as everybody knows, Virginia creeper doesn't need much help to grow. So I said, well, why don't you just plant a bunch of that at the toe of the slope, and it might grow up and it might hold the slope in place. And why don't you stagger some pine trees at the top of the hill? So he did that. Of course, all the Virginia creeper died, but the pine trees did really well. And it stopped, it served as a reminder for maintenance crews not to go close to the edge, no more dumping, no more stockpiling, no more staging. I can call up, I can show you a picture, an aerial photo from 2014 that I have on my screen that might be helpful. The only problem is I just tried to share the screen and it said this will stop other screen sharing. Let me try that. So can everybody see that?
Yes, we can.
So that was taken in 2014, and this is from just Mass DOT pictometry. And you can see, this is the edge. This is the edge here. These are the pine trees that were put in. You know, a couple didn't make it, but when you fast forward to today, most of them are still there. The problem is this slope is even closer now. The decomposition that's taking place along this edge is really what we're here to talk about and hopefully try to rectify, because it is within your jurisdiction. Right now, there's no imminent threat to the down gradient resource areas, but if something's not done to this slope, it's going to continue to be a problem, and eventually you're going to lose big chunks of it. And as soon as that happens, now you have fines and other material migrating into the resource areas. So
you say fines, you mean fine materials?
I'm sorry?
When you say fines, you're referring to fine materials?
Yeah, really just silt and clay. You know, the silt and clay that would be in the soil, they have a tendency to move with the water. They stay suspended longer, and you really don't want a lot of silt and clay getting into the resource areas. Anybody that's seen a mud puddle dry up, what's left is just this shell of silt. That's what we're trying to avoid. I'm going to stop sharing and go back to a different plan, which is Steve's. Let me see here.
Greg, if I may, because I might want to take you back to that
Yep.
last picture. How are you referring to that?
So that's just a 2014 aerial photo.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yep. So this is the plan that Steve had up earlier, and I'm going to draw on it. I'm just going to annotate where the, let me pick a color that you didn't use. So this line that I'm drawing, can everybody see that?
Yes.
That is roughly the top of the existing slope. And what we need to do is start at the bottom and pull that slope back so that it's uniform, it's not one-to-one, and that we can provide a suitable planting medium to establish a good vegetative base. And in this case, it would be a slope stabilization mix, which would contain native grasses that should do really well out here. But in order to accomplish that goal, we have to start at the bottom and pull the grade back. And we're proposing, instead of 1-to-1, which it is now, to bring it to 2.5-to-1. 3-to-1, I think, is too flat. 2-to-1 is still pretty steep. 2.5-to-1 will still allow for some decomposition and still, hopefully, at the end of the day, have a suitable, stable slope remain above the resource areas. Once that's done, we're proposing to install an additional row of erosion control. Let me just grab a different color here. We're going to propose an additional row of erosion controls on the top of the new slope, which is shown here. And that's just to break up the subcatchment, because even though this is very flat up in here, if we have a good rain event, it's going to push stormwater towards that edge. And we don't want the water disrupting what we just reconstructed. So this erosion control will protect that slope while it revegetates. It's temporary. Once the area is covered with a suitable herbaceous base, we're proposing to come in and strategically plant shrub species within that new slope. The hard part is the exact density and location. I think it's premature just to scatter a bunch of letters on this slope and show the commission where we're hoping to plant things. I think what makes more sense is when the time comes, if Steve's willing, to meet me out here and the two of us just pick the best spots to put these shrubs. We're proposing a few different species, and we can certainly modify that list. Let me just erase some of those lines. So I'm proposing sweet pepperbush, northern arrowwood, and silky dogwood. I did see them growing down in the existing vegetative buffers, so I think they'll do well here. They tend to like to have their feet wet. So that's something that we'll have to take into consideration depending on what we have as our planting medium. If it looks like it's going to be too dry, we might have to modify the species. But the net, what we're hoping the net result here is a stable slope covered with herbaceous growth that we're able to plant with native shrub species, and then just leave it alone. Once that's done, the area on top, we'd be proposing a series of white pine and red oak trees that would line the top of the slope to serve as a permanent vegetative barrier to prohibit anybody from going towards that edge with anything moving forward. These trees would be well outside the riverfront. So even if Unquity Brook does swell a little bit, we've got ourselves probably about a 20-foot cushion that we could still have before these trees even come into the riverfront area. Because we know that brook's having issues even right now. When you go down there, it's probably quite flooded. The culvert's underwater and there's something going on there. So as part of our plan, we try to take that into consideration and give ourselves some wiggle room. Because what the school wants to be able to do is still utilize this area, but they want to make sure that the activities and all activities are outside of your jurisdiction moving forward. So I know I just said a lot, but the long and short of it is stabilize the slope, set a 1-to-1, 2.5-to-1, vegetate it, put up a barrier, and then just leave it alone. We finally got a file number from DEP. I'm not sure why it took so long. There were no comments, at least as of yet. We're not mapped as estimated a priority habitat, so we didn't have to file with the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife Natural Heritage Program. I'd be happy to answer any questions the commission might have.
Hey, Greg, can I ask a question in terms of pulling back up out of the slope? And I know you're trying to go from a 1-to-1 to a 2.5 to 1. But in the red line that you've drawn, I'm at the top of the hill now, top of the slope. So you'd be pulling back from the red line, which is sort of center right, up, just disappeared.
Yeah.
It was your red line that I was referring to.
Yeah, so let me put that back up real quick. It will just take me a sec. So that red line I drew was the existing top of slope plus or minus.
So you're talking about pulling, what I say center right, back to essentially the tree line. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we'd be pulling, the new top of slope would be where you see the erosion controls.
Correct.
Yep.
All right. And then what are you doing at the bottom of the slope?
So at the bottom of slope, we're proposing to install erosion controls. And then just really let me pan up for a minute here. So really, this line that you see here, this kind of jagged line.
Yes.
What I did is I met the survey crew out there and I walked them around and I said, take a shot here, take a shot here. And what those shots represent is, Ned had mentioned areas where the debris had started to slough and get to the bottom of the hill. This is just material that can be raked up. You could go out there with a rake today and rake that up, but we're going to have an excavator out here. So what they'll do is just carefully take the bucket and scratch this material back. And there's less than a foot of material down here. That's why we don't show any finished grades in this location. We're just going to literally remove that carefully under the direction of a wetland scientist, keep the erosion controls in place, and then we'll dust that with a conservation wildlife mix.
But there were some areas where there were trees, and I know they're not marked here, but we were all, or most of us were out there, and it's probably, again, to the center and to the right, there were trees there that were clearly, 2 or 3 feet of fill up from the roots.
Yeah.
And they're clearly going to die if you don't pull that back. I'm not sure where those trees were. But it seems like it's more than just sloughing off. It looked like, fill had been placed there over the roots of the trees up maybe a couple of feet.
Yeah, I have some
up here. See the extent of fill material over on the right-hand side?
Yes.
That's the general area and back. We're from the pink line up through that area on the right-hand side.
Yep.
That's where that scenario occurred that you're talking about.
Yeah, and one thing that we had in our narrative is that we're going to do our best to carefully remove fill from the trees, and any trees that we can keep, that's the goal. But I think the reality is that fill's been there long enough that those trees are compromised. And based on my observation, I think it's safe to say that most of those trees, if not all of the trees growing out of those slopes, are going to need to go. And we're fully prepared to put new trees in to replace them. But again, I think the location of those is going to be largely dependent on what we find as we're removing this material. We may find that some of that fill, especially up in this area, is new enough that we can carefully remove it and salvage those trees. But certainly all of the trees that I observed down in this location, most of them look dead already. And I've done projects like this before, and even though you're still seeing leaves and growth on the trees, as soon as you start to remove this material, you see that the tree itself is just gone.
And isn't that the result of the fill?
Yeah.
But so you're talking about, and again, I can point to it on my own screen, but though that jagged line that you said you were going to pull that out, but that was going to be relatively easy. What about pulling back the fill all the way back to the pink line is the jurisdiction line from the BVW. Yes, that line right there.
Yep.
What
Yeah.
about pulling the fill back and getting back to original elevation?
Well, I think the problem you're going to have there, you'll have a 10-foot drop. You'll have a 10-foot drop in that location. So you'd either need to put a retaining wall in, or now the new top of slope would be way back here. That would be a very large amount of material that you'd be removing. And what we suspect happened out here is that long ago, somebody created this platform to create a suitable staging area for the school. Probably even before there were regulations governing wetlands. And then over the years, material was just pushed over the edge, and just to make more room, to keep it flat. So I think what we have is a dusting of organic material over a very suitable base. And what we're gonna find out when we start removing this material exactly what's there. Because if this was all organic material, you wouldn't be able to drive on it. You know, you wouldn't be able to bring a dump truck in here or a front end loader. It would just sink. And really the only area that we're observing the decomposition is along the edges.
Now, the trees that we're looking at here in that semicircle, are those is that existing condition, or is that proposed to plant those there?
These are all proposed, white pines and red oaks.
So if you took out the proposed ones, and I know you showed us a photograph and said some of those trees didn't make it, some of them did.
Mm-hmm.
But if you took that line of trees out and then just kind of move the top of bank back, would that allow you then to pull back all of the fill, at least up to our jurisdictional line there, the pink line?
So just to put it into perspective, the elevation right here is 94.
Right.
And if I come across parallel, the existing contour here is 78. You know, so it's a lot higher. You know, to remove this
from material that's been added.
I'm sorry?
A lot higher from material that's been added.
Right.
So it's non-native material, but
right. And we've been
like it's always been there.
Well, I think to some extent, you know, regulatory wise, I think it has always been there. I think it's been added to over the years for sure. And that's what we're just not sure of. We've been doing our best to talk to people at the school to try to get a clear understanding of, you know, when the initial, I'll call it a plateau, was created. And we're not quite there yet. We know it was before 1990. And I know after 2012, no additional material was dumped beyond the pine trees that were planted. But the gray area is when the actual plateau was created.
You know, I've seen, it may be a little unusual, but it might be a good idea. I see that Marvin Gordon is on the call tonight. And as a neighbor, I don't know if he's technically in a butter, but it's pretty close. Mr. Gordon, can you give us any history of this site? It might be helpful to the commission.
I can give you some history of it.
Would you do so? That would be helpful to us.
You're addressing that to me?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, well, let me, Milton Academy purchased this property of the 12 acres from what my father told me, because he was bidding against them to get it from an estate in, I believe, 1938. And I can tell you, parenthetically, I'm 84 years old. When I was 7 or 8 years old, on this same property, I could cut the whole from the top where the wall of the Milton Cemetery is down with this constant slope that followed the same line as the hill on Gun Hill Street. All this material, and I got very interested in this for very many years. Parenthetically, one of your predecessors as chairman of the Conservation Commission, who lived right across the street, Marty Curtis, used to call this the Gun Hill Street dump, because everything from Milton Academy came and was dumped there. In the late 1980s, during the years when 7 years that I was on the Board of Selectmen, there was and in the early 90s, there was a tremendous amount of construction going on Milton Academy. This is all historical, and the fill from the excavations was all being dumped here and built this slope tremendously. And then going back to when Kevin Murren was the was the town manager, and it was, I'm not exactly sure of the timing of when the town passed a bylaw that you couldn't move more than 600 yards even on your same property without a permit. Kevin and I calculated there was a minimum of 3,000 yards that had been moved from excavations, creating this slope, very steep slope, which that you can't. As I said, when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, I used to be able to go on a snow sled from the top of that hill right to the bottom on a constant grade. Now that area has been flattened at the top, and it's a steep slope, and there's thousands of yards of material, much more than was allowed by the bylaw that was passed for the limit the moving to 600 yards. So that's, but Kevin Murren and the Board of Selectmen at that time decided we weren't going to go into World War III with Milton Academy of it if we could rectify what was there.
What's the time?
When Anne Marie Fagan became the executive secretary, I had a meeting with her and one of the executives of Milton Academy, and when a commitment was made not only to have plantings but there would be no additional. There would be you could use it for temporary storage for landscaping materials and so forth, but there would be no additional filling. I can tell you from looking at the property for 30 years that there's a lot more material's been filled in there, a lot more than when the commitment was made to Anne Marie Fagan and to Kevin Murren. So this is a string of 30 years, more than 30 years of broken promises. And you can see by looking at this very plan that's on the board right now, the loam leaf pile, mulch piles, and so forth aren't just temporary storage. Those were there as dumping spots, and on top of that, which doesn't show here, is that for this year, even this year, this site has been used for the temporary storage of uncovered salt to be used on the roads of Milton Academy. So this whole thing has been a disaster, absolute first-class disaster from day one, and a string of broken promises from Milton Academy to the town of Milton. And I wish actually the cemetery trustees had not been so adamant about the a solar array, because turning this property into a solar array would at least environmentally be a big plus, and it would cease being the dumping area that it still is to this very day. So that's a lot of the history, but I think that the Conservation Commission, if they want to hear a lot of the real history, could talk to Anne Marie Fagan about the agreements that she had supposedly had with the Academy, with Kevin Murn, and they back me up that it's been a string of one disaster after another. Thank you.
Mr. Gordon, thank you very much for giving us that historic perspective. That's very important to us. But Anne Marie Fagan when did she retire? Is it about 5 years ago? I'm just trying to put this into like a chronology as to.
That's right, about 4 years ago.
4 years ago?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, fair enough. That's very helpful.
Yeah, that was before that. When she first started out as being the town manager, after she inherited it from
Kevin Murn. Kevin Murn had it before.
From Colton. Then as when we had these discussions with the gal, Ms. Vanderbilt from the Academy in the town hall, and she can fill you in on them. And I can tell you, just looking at this plan, that the commitments that were supposedly made were not kept.
Mr. Gordon, what year was that meeting with Vanderbilt Brown, approximately? Was that in the 90s, did you say?
No, she's been there for about 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
Okay. And Ned,
But Mr. Gordon,
I was told that by a mutual acquaintance that supposedly the Academy had been reaching out to me within this last year about all these problems. I haven't heard from anybody. No one from Milton Academy has attempted to contact me, but parenthetically, for the members of the Conservation Commission who don't know it, I'm basically in a butter. My property goes right in and intersects Gun Hill Street, right at the cemetery wall, which is the dividing line to the Milton Academy property. So no one, if they've told you they've reached out to me to discuss any of this, they never have. Now, the last time I've met with anybody from Milton Academy was with Anne Marie Fagan. Before that, I had meetings with Kevin Murn and them, and before and at one point before this was a big issue, Joe McKettrick and I, as selectmen, had a meeting with the head of school and the business manager. So I've got the history. I've lived here. I've lived here, I'm 84 years old. I've lived here my entire life.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Gordon. We appreciate it. There's one thing that I can probably direct this to Greg. I don't think that Nick he might have knowledge. So Nick, you might want to speak up. I'm going to ask Greg, have you seen any signs of storage of salt? I mean, that's pretty scary to us. And I don't know if you've done any testing of the soils there, but storage of salt would be anathema to our duty to protect the wetlands.
Yeah, I didn't observe any salt. I've been out here on numerous occasions, but I certainly haven't observed this site as long as Mr. Gordon.
Sure, no, I understand that. And Nick, I confess, I don't know how long you've been in the position. I don't know if you're aware of any salt storage in this area.
Nick Parnell? Are you asking Nick?
Yes, I was. Ned, I was asking Nick Parnell. I don't know if you.
I think.
No, I don't recall any of that. And I've been here 5 years.
Right. Yeah, that's what I thought, Nick. I didn't know how far back you went.
Nope.
So I do have, Milton Academy was audited by the EPA. This goes back almost 15 years at this point under Kevin's work. And there was significant discussions about management salt across the academy and any of the property because of the salt risk to wetlands. And salt storage areas were identified in hardscape. I'm not aware of any areas or use of salt outside of those areas of the academy. And it was a significant issue from the stormwater control point, and specifically with EPA, because the audit was done on 5 different levels, including OSHA and rec conditions. So I'd be very surprised to hear that there was salt used by Steve Zanino in those areas, because there were numerous meetings related to it.
Brent, I appreciate that fact, but I thought the audit was where the salt was being used, and Mr. Gordon was referencing where it was being stored.
No, it has to do with storage specifically.
Okay.
We had a similar issue, on the academy in the O'Hare Pond area, and that condition was significant, so that we managed that, and that brought up any other areas, and that included use of salt in the ATC area, in the lower parking lot across the street where the lacrosse fields are, just in terms of management of those materials and use, and limiting any storage on site anywhere for that reason.
All right. And let me ask another question from a scientific perspective, and it may be you, Brandon, it may be Greg that could answer this, but if we were looking on this hillside to find out where the original elevation was, the native soil, can you do as a relatively simple task, can you just do a soil boring and figure out how much is fill, and then when do you hit the native or original soil?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can make some realistic assumptions just based on the topography on either side of the fill pile of what we're going to find. But yes, by simply taking a scoop with the excavator, we'd be able to see where virgin ground was, or the old surface was. There'd be a buried A layer, or there should be a buried, surface layer, and it's probably going to match the contours on either side.
All right, that would be helpful to us, and because of the suggestion that there may have been salt stored there at some point, I'd like to do some testing of those soils. If you do a boring, if you could do a test of it as well, because that would help us in determining how far to pull it back. And I do recognize the difference between the 100-foot line and the 200-foot, and I see that they actually merge or cross actually. And I do understand the historic perspective of that the 100-foot line might go back to 1970, whereas the 200-foot line might go back only to 1990, whatever it was, 6 or 97, or whatever the date of the Rivers Act was. And I do understand that difference. But even looking at the 100-foot line, is there any reason why we shouldn't ask to pull it back to that line?
Well, I think it's, you brought up a couple important points there. I think it sounds like from Mr. Gordon's testimony that the bulk of the fill material was brought in this location in the early 90s. If that was the case, the Rivers Protection Act didn't come out till 1996, as you just pointed out. So the riverfront area probably didn't exist when the bulk of this work was done. Based on my observations from doing the wetland delineation, in the location on the plan that's shown here, where the buffer zone really kicks up on this side,
yes,
there's a pretty broad transition zone down here. And I think it's more than likely a result of the water that's backing up at this culvert. It's probably been doing it for some time. So the wetland edge is probably pushed out a lot further than it probably was even in the early 90s. Of course, all of this is speculation. But even if that was the case, I still think you would have had a good chunk of this material within your jurisdiction. But it probably would have been pretty close to the outskirts of the buffer zone.
All right, but I guess what I'm asking is really it's a feasibility question as opposed to whether or not you should do it or not. But could you pull it back to I'm looking at the pink line, which is the 100-foot mark, not the blue line, which would be the Rivers Way Act, but what would happen to the top of the slope? I mean, how far back would you have to pull the top of the slope where the proposed trees are in order to pull all that fill out up to the extent of the 100-foot pink line there?
Yeah, so we'd probably be out here now with
Okay.
our new top of slope. You know, and I think if this was gonna go that route and the commission said, you know, we want all this material out, or we want you to test it to prove that it's, you know, it's okay to stay. I think at that point, the damage, you know, the amount of work that would be involved just to take some scoops out and find out where the original surface was, at that point, it would probably make sense just to pull out some additional material and move the top of slope back. And that's something that I'll have to discuss with the school and the team just to see what that would all mean. You know, we were under the impression that the material was there a lot longer than 1990. And certainly if that was the case, there'd be a much stronger argument for it to stay. But if it was there as late as 1990, the Wetlands Protection Act and regulations were clearly in place at that time. So that certainly changes things. And now that we've learned this new information, I think we need to discuss it as a team.
The pullback, John, would be about 40 feet paralleling the red wetland line on a rough level. Maybe anywhere from, you know, basically 20 to 40 feet for the reshape.
And,
So
if you pulled it back to 20 to 40 feet, would that still give you the 2.5 to 1 ratio?
Oh yeah, we could
understand.
We would maintain the slope to the toe, you know, to cut in at the red line. But again, you know, essentially you would see pullback and paralleling the red, you know, 100-foot buffer zone.
Understood.
Right.
Questions from commissioners or Steve Ivers?
Just as a additional technical point, Greg, you said you thought that this area here, it would be the east side of the green line. I believe that at that location, there is a definite slope change between where the green line is and the upland is. So I think that's been there for a long time, frankly. I think that's a natural slope, and I don't think it's gotten any wetter over time. Basically, the groundwater is probably pretty close, and the extent of the line goes to the extent of the growing cinnamon fern in that location. Just FYI, that's all.
Any questions or comments from commissioners?
Yes.
Arthur?
Let Jerry go first, please, John.
Okay, I'm sorry, Arthur.
No, go ahead, Jerry.
Greg, would you bring up that 2014 picture?
I can. I have to stop sharing first. Let me see if I can pull that back up. I may have to call it back up here. Yeah, just bear with me for a minute. All right, and that was 2014. Yeah, there it is. All right, let's see, screen share. Can you see it there?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, now let's bring it to the edge where you see the pile.
Right here?
And that tree right there.
Yep.
What is the distance? Do you have an estimate to the distance from the top of that to what was the natural topography without this fill? Because I observed that it looked like almost 10 feet when we were there.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, I
Okay.
I don't either, Jerry.
I'm sorry?
Is that a vertical distance you're looking for, Jerry?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
that's
Oh,
vertical.
from the tree to the edge of the slope there?
No. How, you throw a rock off the edge there, how far is it gonna fall down?
13
Oh.
feet,
How
What was
many?
that, Brandon?
roughly 13 to 14 feet.
Okay. So, and this is all fill from the, this looks like a upside down bowl. This is all unnatural fill from the, used, I think Mr. Corcoran said, as a maintenance area from the regular campus and stuff. Is that fair to say?
That was fill that we understood was brought over from the main campus in the 1980s and early 90s.
Okay, so, and please forgive me, I don't want to be fresh, but in your introduction in the first paragraph, it says that as a staging area for landscape debris and other grounds material utilized in the campus. Now that's not the case. Is that fair to say?
No, that's the current use,
That's the current.
right? Which is what we spoke of in the introductory paragraph.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's arguing that. It looks like some fill was brought here, Jerry. I'm not sure.
Okay, so now if you go back to to your original plan, if you would, please.
Yep. Stand by. Is it up there?
Yes. So at this tree line that you propose, what will the vertical be from the new topography when you remove all the dirt to make the slope of, what'd you say, 2.5 to 1? What will be the height from this original level down to the new level?
So it would be the same height. Instead of being able to kind of hold your hand out and drop the rock, now you just have to throw it a little bit to get to that new toe.
So it won't be 16 feet or 10 feet?
Well, so the top of the slope, it's shown as 94, and the bottom of the slope is still 70. We've just taken it and stretched it out over a longer distance, so it's not as steep. Now it's going to be a much more manageable slope that you'd be able to establish vegetative cover on and plant.
But when we were out there was a 8-foot difference approximately from when you were standing closer to the blue line and looking up at the area, the staging area.
Yeah, so we're not proposing to do anything to the bottom or anything to the top elevations. Those are staying the same. We're just proposing to separate them further apart to flatten that slope.
But there will be at some point along this, there is going to be between a 10-foot plus or minus edge.
So no, it would still be a 14-foot drop just over a much longer distance. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question correctly for you, but we're just lessening the steepness of that. Right now, it's tough to walk up that slope. As proposed, it would be fairly easy to walk up that slope.
But I'm not talking about the slope. I'm at what will the difference be between one of those trees, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth tree from the right going up, and then going down into to the proposed leveling area? Isn't there going to be a 5, 6, or 10-foot difference that you're going to have to put either a retaining wall or something along those lines?
Nope.
No.
So we're literally just stretching that out so it's not as steep.
Greg, put your hand up, and show him.
Yeah. So right now it's like this.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's going to be more like this.
Right.
And that's why the top is moving further away from the wetlands, because we can't stretch it out the other way because we'd be getting too close to the wetlands. So we're removing material, we're scraping it, we're pulling it back to establish a more uniform, less steep slope.
So let me make one comment here. There is going to be a reduction in overall slope from the toe, but the existing toe right now is an existing contour line. And if you look at that contour line and you were carrying that 70 contour line across, that bottom of slope is approximately, from north to south or right to left, is about what the toe of slope used to be historically, where it cuts in. There is an existing slope that existed prior to this going back up slope. If you just go outside of the area of fill, you have a natural slope that has a rise roughly about 15 feet. You're looking at a foot over 15 feet. So you're getting some slope carried backwards up the slope as you go, as you start cutting off that fill material. So you're not going to have that full vertical cut at a flat plane. It's actually got some slope up. So from the toe of slope that you're looking at this, at the wetlands buffer line, if we were to pull this back, you're looking at about 8 feet of rise to the crest of the slope if you held the top of the slope flat. In other words, we would still have a 2.5 to 1 slope pulled back, but the top of the slope, the top or the flat or the crest of the crown is not going to change in terms of elevation. So, again, it's going to be, instead of throwing the rock, if you throw the rock to the wetlands line or the 100-foot buffer zone line, it's going to be an 8-foot drop. If you were to throw it to this elevation 70, you would still have that full height of drop to 13 to 14 feet. And I think that's what Greg were trying to say, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
So, and Mr. Cochran or Greg, going back to the use, how long has it been being used as a transfer station? And when did it stop being a maintenance area, filling area? When did you stop different excavation material from the main campus and stuff? When did that stop?
Well, first of all, I don't know that we can call this a transfer station. I don't think we called that a transfer station anyway.
I'm sorry, a staging area.
Yeah. So we don't
Some of the activities have never stopped.
I'm sorry?
Some of the activities have never stopped. They still used it to bring brush and other materials from the main campus over. But the filling.
And to be buried there?
No, none of that. But the substantial filling that happened, I think our history is pretty consistent with Mr. Gordon's. It all happened in the 80s and 90s. There was a lot of building going on the campus and a lot of materials being moved, and they brought it over here. And they created this mound, or this plateau. We don't have any, I think our understanding is pretty consistent.
John?
Yes, Arthur.
Greg, question, going back to the survey lines that you discussed earlier in the sediment or silt that's in that zone, I'm assuming that's erosion from the slope that will be pulled back, graded back, or raked back. Is that correct?
Yeah, so what we observed down there in the form of sediment was really just, it was almost like a sawdusty consistency. Very, very well decomposed leaf litter. We didn't see any silt and clay. Okay. That was really, it looked more like, leaf litter, I think is the best way to describe it. And I walked right up that slope and I was, sinking in the leaf litter as though it was snow. It was very soft and I didn't observe anything during the wetland delineation or anything at the base of that slope that led me to believe that there was anything harmful in there. There was certainly no evidence of that visually.
And my next question is with respect to the mitigation that will occur after the slope is pulled back and regraded, would any terracing of the new slope be advantageous?
Well, we're probably, and Brandon brought this up as a question early on. He said, how the hell are you going to build that slope? You're going to have to get halfway down there first to be able to dig it. They don't make a bucket that long. And he's right. We're going to have to get creative when this work is done, and then they're going to have to fix it as they pull themselves out of there. But yeah, this will probably be done in stages. They'll have to dig down, temporarily terrace it while they grade the lower slope, and then back themselves up onto the top, and then pull the grade back to make it uniform with the grade below.
And I understand that. What about, would there be any advantage to leaving some of the terracing relative to enhancing the mitigation, preventing erosion, post-grading erosion, and so on down the line?
I mean, we certainly could. It would just pull the top of the slope further back. I just, it's not that long of a run. I don't think you'd need to do that here.
Okay.
I think certainly breaking up the subcatchment while everything takes and stabilizes itself makes sense. And we may find that row of erosion controls that we're showing on the top isn't enough. And at that point, we might have to put an additional row halfway down just to break it up even further. But we're also proposing erosion control blankets to be put down after the area is seeded. And those will be stapled together and fastened to the slope. So I think, with the erosion controls on top and the blankets and the seed mix underneath, I think that should be enough.
Thank you.
I would like to add, just offer this one, Greg. You might wish to add some deep-rooted grasses, large blue stem, and what's the other grass? Switchgrass, that grow with very deep roots to assist in stabilizing the slope. It makes a lot of sense to me.
Yep.
Does that make sense to you?
It does.
Yeah.
Steve, you remind me, going back to the mention earlier of the culvert in the extension of the wetlands at the base. On site, we talked about contacting Milton Cemetery. Have they gotten back to you with anything about any plans to repair the culvert that may be damaged or blocked?
Yeah, I visited the site with Lisa Ahern, and it doesn't look like the culvert is really blocked. I think it's more of a size issue.
Okay, so it's not large enough.
Exactly, that's my guess. And
I had that in the back of my mind too.
Yeah, the reason is it was built up gradient, so they did a lot of buildings. So the culvert at one time probably handled the flow, but then they created additional impervious surface on the campus, and now we've got, a flashy system is what it's called, which rises and drops very quickly.
We can talk. That helps. We can follow up offline.
Sure. Sure. Yep.
When you say the campus on that, Steve, are you meaning the cemetery campus?
No.
Or back on the other side, on the academy side, on the other side of Green Avenue?
The culvert is directly at the Milton Academy cemetery wall. That's the culvert we're talking about, just above the little pond in the cemetery. That's where the culvert is.
But when you talk about activity on the campus, the change in impervious surface, would that have been sort of upstream on the other side of Randolph Avenue?
Yes.
On the campus?
Oh, sure.
Okay. Got it.
Nothing close by, right?
Yeah, no, just the way I was picturing it as you were describing it was maybe it was happening on the cemetery side, because as the cemeteries developed with roadways and whatnot, maybe they were. But that makes sense to me. Thank you.
Yeah, look for, we're going to be talking about removing some of those roadways, or some of the impervious surface on those roadways in the next few years on the cemetery. So look for that improvement.
Are there other questions from commissioners or comments?
I've got a question for Greg. Earlier in the conversation, we were talking about the fill covering up the flare of the tree and going up the trunk. And Greg, you had mentioned that in the recontouring process, some of those trees would have to go. I'm curious if you recall what kind of trees they were?
Yeah, there's a lot of ash and there's a couple dead oaks.
Yes, agreed.
You know, they all look like they're in trouble. As much as I'd like to tell the commission that it looks like we're going to be able to save them and everything's going to be great, I think the reality is probably about 6 to 10 trees that look to be goners to me. The school is certainly willing to put in more trees. I just want to put them in spots where it makes the most sense. And obviously they do too. They don't want to have to do it more than once. And that's why I was hoping to be able to get permission from this commission to work with Steve. If this is approved, after the area is stabilized with herbaceous cover, to find the best spots for the trees and shrubs. And that's why you don't see little A's and B's and C's where I'm proposing things.
Right.
I think it's just too premature.
Understood. And I'd like to be a part of that conversation as well.
And if I could add a question to that, would it make sense to think about other locations as opposed to trying to replant all here? Or is it more advantageous to plant in the general area here?
I think part of the issue is stabilization. Isn't that part of the objective here? I mean, the varieties of grasses with long roots, but I think, some of it, Ned, really is sort of a structural.
Sure.
And part of it will be wildlife habitat as well.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. So a nice, mix of varieties would be advantageous as well.
Got it.
Yep.
Any other comments or questions from commissioners?
I do. Steve, I'm curious if you have any other thoughts or opinions on this project to share with us.
I would love to see it taken back to the pink line. That's all.
The toe of the slope.
No.
Yeah, the toe of the slope taken back to the pink line.
Into the pink line.
The pink line is the 100-foot buffer to the BVW.
So starting the slope there at the pink line and moving back the 2.5 to 1 ratio from there.
Yeah, under the regulations, the regulations have been there since 1972. The fill was done between 1972 and 1990, most likely. So bring it back and then create additional buffer for animals. That would be my comment, if anybody asks. And you did. Thank you.
Well, Steve, you just kind of answered my question, and I was going to ask this of Greg. Just how far back outside the 102 foot will you have to go to ensure that there will not be indirect negative impact on the buffer zone? Now, you're talking about plantings, you're talking about new trees, but there's a lot of soil there, and I want to know just how far back, and I know you mentioned earlier, John, going back even further to get some of that fill. How far back can you go?
Jerry, if it's stable, you don't need more than a foot behind that pink line. Just make it stable. That's all.
Okay.
The gentlemen and ladies on the big machines can do that. I've seen them in a number of places. It's just a lot of soil to move. That's all.
And Steve, you're suggesting that no additional plantings, sort of like even a further back safety precaution area kind of thing, where one line of trees is going to do it. You don't think there should be more in that
oh no
built-in
no.
area?
we would plant the slope. We would vigorously plant the slope.
Okay.
Absolutely. That would be necessary to really do it. I did a project, just a quick story. I did a project at the Wellesley recycling station. We had a 1-to-1 slope that we were dealing with, and it stayed 1-to-1, 35 feet high. We had somebody take out 70,000 cubic yards. It was all compost. We stuck in a bunch of different willows into the compost, put some jute matting on it, and today you would never know that area was bare at one time. It's a jungle. If you do it right, you can do it. And this may have some compost, or the compost may be in the toe of the slope there between the pink line and the wetland. So, I would put the compost aside and make it as the cover to the slope when you finish out. That's an opportunity, I believe. It looks, I agree with Greg. It looks like a lot of compostable material, composted material. So I would use it as a final cover. Just me.
Well, John, you had mentioned that we're probably going to need another site visit when a little later on in the spring when the snow is out of there, correct?
Yes, and I can add to that suggestion that do we need to get out and see it again? But I can add to that suggestion with a question to Greg, and that is, I am concerned with the construction phasing of this. If you're pulling the slope back, it's going to be very unstable for a period of time. What do you think of the suggestion of waiting until a dry season to actually do the construction? Like an August instead of a April?
Well, I certainly think that whenever you have an elevated landform directly above a resource area that's going to be unstable for a prolonged period, there is risk there. If you get those rapid precipitation events that all seems to come at once. I do want to target a growing season, though, to try to get this seed mix down and the plantings in. I suppose that could be accomplished with a summer excavation effort targeting a fall growing season. I know the school doesn't want to run into a situation where there is sediment in the resource area, because that would lead to problems. And we did talk about that. So I think in the back of their minds, targeting a summer project anyways. So I do think that would be appropriate in this case.
Okay, mine was a real question. I wasn't pushing for it. I was just trying to get your assessment.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good suggestion. I think a summer excavation when things are dry, targeting a fall growing season seems to make sense to me.
I know I can speak on behalf of the school that they want to do it right, and if that's the best right, then they would certainly support that.
Bearing in mind we're excavating the material and for off-site disposal, you're not going to see, a significant amount of disturbed areas over what you currently have. And then the other factor in this is that physically, you're only looking at about a 2-week effort to remove anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 yards of material. Because this type of material you're going to send off is not being sent off in 30-yard, transport trucks. It's going to be sent off in 100-yard box trailers, because the material doesn't have a significant amount of weight. You can load quite a bit of material in a very short window. So, again, your extension in time for risk is, limited to a couple of weeks. And I can't imagine, unless you get a catastrophic, 20-year or 100-year storm, that you'd have a lot of risk to that with appropriate stormwater control with the total flow. We work with a lot worse and a lot more waterfront coastal divisions, and the risks are somewhat minimal. But again, to the extent that it satisfies the commission, we can
And was somebody going to talk about the boring and the testing of the soil and so on and so forth? Did I
Yeah,
miss that?
I think that's pretty simple, and that may be the takeaway from this meeting, and that is, I think Greg said that he wanted to go back, and probably Brandon does as well, to the Milton Academy folks about the possibility of pulling it back to the pink line and what that would do to the top of the plateau, because you'd have to move those trees back, and I think, Brandon, you indicated it would probably come back 20 plus feet. If we pulled the line back from the 100-foot buffer. So that's one area of discussion for you folks. The other one is we'd like to have the soil borings done anyway for two reasons. One is to find the virgin earth, and then also to do any testing to make sure that we don't have any kind of salt contamination there.
So a couple of things here. We're talking about conducting investigations on a one-to-one slope. You're not going to do that with a soil boring rig. Even with a bomb or a small rig, they're not going to satisfy that. More than likely, the investigations would be done with test pits. They would have to be excavated down to identify the native material and backfill. We can do that. Again, we get into things like benching the site, being able to access the site with an excavator to make a lot of that happen. So we'd have to consider that in terms of how we, conduct this work. The depths based on the contours, the historical contours that, east and west or north and south of the boundaries, suggest that, at the maximum, most of our cut depths for any kind of a test bit of boring are going to hit somewhere native material, somewhere at a maximum of about 12 feet. And that tapers off, cut the top of the slope, the top of the slope, the bottom of the slope. That just gives you some sense of, what kind of depth we'd be looking at in terms of using an excavator tool. A CAT 235, 70-ton machine would easily be able to manage that. But we would have to bench down some to get the excavation reach, because we only have about a 25 to 28 foot, horizontal reach before we'd actually be tapped out. And what you're looking at from crest to slope to toe slope is about 60 to 70 feet. So it would require some benching in to actually get the machine to be able to work off of that slope. So that the investigation won't be as, and unfortunately, the investigation won't be as clean as it would look. From an MCT perspective, the anticipation was we would characterize soil for two reasons. One, for characterization for waste disposal, but also for mass reclamation at two facilities, one down in Bridgewater, one in Carver, that accepts this type of material in old quarry pit areas. Mass is struggling with managing, waste materials of this type, because they're naturally occurring organic materials and soils and gravels, and spills like this are filling up landfills. That's why when you go to your transfer stations and dumps, they don't want your refuse, your yard refuse to go into your solid waste. So we are trying to characterize the material to target these disposal facilities, and they need samples of 1 per 1,000 yards. Those numbers basically say if we're moving about 2,000 yards, we need 2 samples. For the intent of statistical, reasons, we wanted to collect at least 3 characterization samples. To the extent that we, do some surface checks on salt, we can characterize, surface materials for salt across areas on the platform to see if there were any area additions of salt. The second part of the characterization for, for what we would be doing would be to identify any conditions that would be a reportable condition under the MCP, and those would be for material hazards. Those would be for things like PCBs, herbicides, pesticides, volatile organic compounds, semi-volatile organic compounds, ignitability, flash point, several other parameters. And those samples would also be taken, with the waste characterization to confirm that there's no material within this that's within a risk. If we do identify material that's in a risk, the risk category, they would have to be above what's called the reportable concentrations of the reportable MCP. Those characterization of that data would have to characterize the critical exposure pathway and imminent hazard of significant release from migration to be reported to DEP immediately. Conditions of a 2-hour notification, 72-hour, 120-day notification would also be present for any analytical that exceeded the S3 soil parameters under the MCP. So, I guess in a wide, breadth, we are characterizing material for hazard for disposal characteristics and reportable conditions.
Good.
All right.
Thank you. That was a lot of information, Brandon. You always...
You asked if we were going to look at it, and I ran it through. So
you did. Thank you.
I've heard that now twice, and I still have no idea what he said.
All right. So, would you be able to give us some kind of a report from your perspective at our next meeting, which is March 9th? We give you time to talk to your folks to see what's doable. Without repeating everything that Brandon said, in terms of determining where the original elevation was of virgin earth, and then how to sample it. And I know that's going to trigger, your disposal obligations.
Yeah, I mean, the sampling we would conduct would be, materials that are going off site have a waste characterization. Anything that would be left on site would be, used for. And that's where we would conduct a test pit, because that would be the material that remains on site, for any future use.
That's fine. So why don't you just come up with a proposal for that for our next meeting?
Right. We'll locate them. The boring, basically what you're going to look at is the samples that would be collected for off-site disposal would be in the upper material, and material essentially below the, anything within the within the 100-foot buffer zone. The material, outside of the 100-foot buffer zone up slope would be the material that would remain on site, and we would characterize that for use under the MCP parameters. So,
yeah, that's fine. Keep in mind what Steve mentioned, that there may be some organic material that would be good to keep and then spread over the top of the slope.
Right. I mean, assuming all the material comes back clean, any of that material could be used, from a mulching perspective. And yeah, and again, referring to the pre-existing slope conditions, the test pits would do two things. One, they would let you be able to see where the native material, the fill material went to native. So we'd be able to contour that back out and confirm whatever, proposed contour lines we were expecting. But it would also let us know where we were going to be applying cover material, and in the wetlands buffer zone, and where the residual material would pick up and start at the solar slope.
All right, sounds like a plan.
Can you tell me when those test pits will be? You'll be working those?
Not right now.
No, he'll come back with a proposal.
Right. I for my own educational benefit.
It won't be before the next meeting, because at the next meeting, we'll have a plan as to how we'll go forward.
Okay, I would like an opportunity to observe, just for my own educational purposes.
Right.
Good. All right, are there any other questions, comments from commissioners, members of the public, abutters? Is Mr. Gordon still here? Because I would like very much to thank him for his participation tonight, giving us the history of the site. I don't know if he's still here, but thank you, Marvin, very much for your courtesy and contributions. All right, anything else on this one, or otherwise we'll continue it until March 9th?
I just had a quick question.
Of course.
I imagine we'd be able to consider the exploratory borings an exempt activity that wouldn't require an additional permit application?
I believe that's appropriate. Although, Brandon, you did scare me. Some of the machinations involved in getting to a stable place where you could actually do the boring.
Well, we're probably not, we're only going 10 feet. We wouldn't be doing boring. We'd be just using an excavator to do the work. As long as we can get a track tire to slope it down adequately, along the edge, again, back to a 70-ton machine, Cat 235, I'm going to be able to reach and put holes in the ground, in a sufficient number of locations to define, existing, historical A-line or ground conditions.
That's what I can imagine. We'll have to trust your judgment because it's a fair question. And I don't think you need to have a notice of intent to just do the test. But, if you can do it with a boring, great. If you have to do a test pit, great. But you were talking about taking the hill down first and then doing the test.
Yeah, I guess it's a reach issue. I just want to be able to make sure we get, material. I mean, if the commission's not uncomfortable with it, we could run the machine along the Toa slope and dig upward. We would set silt fence along essentially we would use a mulch wattle, set that at the base and be able to drive a tired excavator down along the edge of the.
I do know what you're saying. So why don't you make that part of the plan to come back with us as to how you would do that test boring?
Yeah, the intent is not to disturb material, but obviously we want to be able to reach in and get representative material.
Understood. So if that's part of the plan, we'll be able to consider that on March 9th.
Okay.
John, I just want to alert the commission, it's an issue it's my issue, not the Academy's issue, but March 9th is the start of is the substantive start of the 40B hearing for the 648 Canton Avenue project, the 40B project. It starts at 7:00 that night. I'm representing the neighborhood
Yes.
in opposition to that thing. So I will be, and I know I have a significant motion to be considered at the start of that hearing. So I may or may not be able to join the commission that evening, but I think we're in good hands with Greg and Brandon at this point.
All right, and that's understandable. And I recognize that hearing could be lengthy, but if we can help you with putting you someplace on the agenda nearer to the end, we can certainly do that for you.
That'd be great. And we start at 7, so maybe, and I know you're back potentially with the Ice House project as well that night. So if at least we're behind that, there's a reasonable chance that I could be in front of the commission in time.
All right, we'll do that.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night now.
Thank you.
I know.
I think that completes our regular agenda, and we're on to additional business. Steve, do we have additional business?
Yeah, a couple of items. I'll go through them very quickly. 0 Truman Highway. I'm not sure if you all know, but the demolition has started and it continues in a safe and responsible manner. I've been visiting about once a week or so. Very impressed with their professionalism in terms of taking out the asbestos siding and doing the right thing with it. Walcott Estates.
That's the
Wendy,
paper.
say again?
That's the paper mill.
Yes, that's the paper mill. Right. Wendy and I took a look at the stream at Walcott Estates to make sure that it was being protected properly. And we found one area that was not being protected properly, and that has been rectified recently. I spoke to the supervisor there, and they took some erosion controls and moved them away, and also moved some stage material, soil away. And the last thing I have is, it turns out that in 2019, the town meeting evidently assigned $100,000 to a project of building a bridge at the south end of Pope's Pond. I just found this out from Chase today, and I will be assisting the second filing of a notice of intent for Pope's Pond in the next few months for that bridge construction.
That's really great news, and I'm embarrassed. Arthur, did you know that the town meeting passed? I didn't know it. I'm a town meeting member.
Same here.
I was surprised to hear it. I said to Chase, why don't Arthur and John know this? He said, I don't know. So
good news.
That's great news.
But that really helps us with the circumnavigation of Pope's Pond and public access, and it comes at a great time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd love to see the article. So I'll see if I can get my hands on it.
Yeah.
Sure. And so what you should expect in the next few months is a notice of intent. There was
Great.
one filed in January, but it was so poorly done that Kathy just said, no, I'm sorry. And I agreed with her. I agreed.
The gatekeeper. Good.
Right. No, which is fine, which is great.
Yes.
But
It
it
is.
started something off, which is fantastic. So
All
good
right.
news.
And John, you're gonna look into electronic filing if there's been any change?
I will look at it, but we actually looked at that last spring when the SJC changed court filings to electronic signatures. I was hopeful that DEP would do the same. They did not.
Okay.
I can check again. It
All
certainly makes sense. And while we're still in session now, Wendy, I want to thank you for doing that. I know that you and Steve went out to take a look at the Walcott estate, and that's really helpful. Thank you very much for doing that.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. I always enjoy going out with Steve. It's such a learning opportunity for me.
That's great. That's great. Anything else on the agenda? Steve, anything else?
I have nothing.
Anybody else? Looks like we're ready to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Right. Great meeting.
Thank you.
Good night, all.